Mi nombre es Laura Sánchez, productora de Fragmentos, Espacio de Arte y Memoria. En nombre del Ministerio de las Artes, las Culturas y los Saberes, el Museo Nacional de Colombia, la Dirección de Patrimonio Cultural de la Universidad Nacional de Colombia y Fragmentos, les damos la más cordial bienvenida a esta conversación en el marco de la inauguración de la exposición BALSA del artista Michael Armitage. Queremos agradecer su presencia, así como extender un especial agradecimiento a Michael, quien nos acompaña hoy. Esta exposición también ha sido posible al apoyo del proyecto Museo Afro de Colombia y Somos Art en Movimiento, a quienes extendemos un sincero reconocimiento. Antes de comenzar, una breve información logística. Esta conversación se desarrollará en inglés. Para quienes lo requieran, en el fondo de la sala estarán disponibles dispositivos de traducción simultánea. Se pueden acercar si quieren para reclamarlos. Aprovechamos también para agradecer a todas las personas y equipos que hacen posible este espacio, a nuestro comité artístico, al equipo de Fragmentos, al equipo de vigilancia, servicios generales y al equipo de mediación, cuyo apoyo y constante trabajo permiten que proyectos como este sean posibles. Como avisos adicionales, con gran emoción les contamos que el lunes cerramos la convocatoria Fragmentos para un proyecto artístico. Recibimos una gran cantidad de propuestas y pronto estaremos anunciando en nuestros canales oficiales el proyecto ganador. También queremos invitarlos el sábado 4 de octubre a las 11 de la mañana en esta misma sala a la conferencia La crisis como arte de gobierno del académico italiano Dario Gentili, que hace parte de nuestro programa Argumentos. Finalmente, para dar inicio a esta conversación, quiero contarles que Michael Armitage estará conversando con Andrés Felipe Suárez, coordinador general de Fragmentos Espacio de Arte y Memoria. En estos momentos de convulsión y de xenofobia que vivimos, una exposición como la de Michael Armitage se presenta como una ofrenda para nuestro espíritu. Y para Fragmentos es profundamente significativo albergar hoy esta muestra. Michael Armitage, nacido en Nairobi, Kenia, es hoy reconocido como una de las figuras más influyentes del arte internacional. Obtuvo su BFA en la Slade School of Art de Londres en 2007 y un diploma de posgrado en la Royal Academy School en 2010. Recibió el Ruth Vanguard Art Award en 2020 y en 2021 fue elegido Royal Academician of Painting por la Royal Academy of Art de Londres. Ha expuesto de manera individual y colectiva en instituciones de prestigio de Europa, África, Australia y Estados Unidos, como el Museo de Arte Moderno MoMA, el Museo de Arte Contemporáneo de Sydney, la Royal Academy of Art de Londres y la Norval Foundation. Su obra ha sido reconocida no solo por su riqueza formal, sino también por su técnica incisiva que a menudo alude al folclore de África Oriental, la inestabilidad política y la memoria personal. Desde el 2020, Armitage también ha transformado el panorama institucional a través del Nairobi Contemporary Art Institute, fundado por él para investigar y promover el crecimiento y la preservación del arte contemporáneo en África Oriental mediante exposiciones, residencias, publicaciones y el desarrollo de un programa de posgrado. Está representado por las prestigiosas galerías Y-Cube y David Zwirner. Actualmente vive y trabaja entre Nairobi y Bali. No siendo más, le cedo la palabra a Andrés. Al finalizar tendremos un breve espacio para preguntas. Muchísimas gracias y de nuevo bienvenidos.
Gracias, Laura. Como les dijo Laura, pues esta conversación la vamos a tener en inglés, así que me van a tener que perdonar el inglés, pero pues llevamos trabajando en este proyecto por lo menos 2 años y esta es una conversación muy emocionante. Welcome, Michael. I was just excusing my English because I was saying that we have been looking for this conversation for over 2 years when I think Doris first told us about this possibility. So this is an amazing opportunity to talk to you and with all our public. I want to start talking about you have previously spoken about the stereotypes that run through society that contribute to the rejection of migrants in your work, you question the otherness, how it is exoticized, how is subject, your subject and represents, your subjects represent that. And these series make a reference to the geopolitical relationship between Africa and Europe. Can you tell us something about how this series engaged in dialogue, cultural dialogue between traditions and imaginaries? And how do you think can art help transform these dominant narratives? Essentially, when your work can be read both as a denunciation, as an invitation to the responsibility of the Western society.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for being here. That's a hell of an opener. I think I've got to try and digest that one. And yeah, and apologies to you all. I can't speak Spanish. And I'm sorry you have to listen to me in English, but yeah. The responsibility of an artist, basically, or how art functions relative to socio-political issues, in my eyes, for me, art is a space of reflection, contemplation, and a space in which you can be moved through objects, through ideas, the strange relationship that one has with an object that allows you a type of reflection like no other. And for me, reflection and the space to reflect is a space in which one can change and one's attitude to things can change. So I don't know if I would say, again, I almost want to take back what I'm about to say as I say it because of the space that we're sitting in. But generally, I would usually think that I wouldn't say that art itself is the thing that can change. It isn't policy. It isn't, a direct action as such. But it is something that sits with and is carried by someone, both when they're in front of it and in the presence of it, and then when they leave. It sits in their imagination. And as we know, politics and ideas also play on the imagination. They're not necessarily based in truth, but one has a position towards something that is largely built upon the imagination and experience. So I do feel that art has an incredibly powerful place within culture and within the world, and a necessary place as a result. Referring back to this group of paintings, the 4 paintings that are here are part of a larger group of 8 paintings, which will be on the screen behind. They were made thinking about the migration route through the Sahara and then into the Mediterranean. In a way, they are the first European paintings that I've made, because they really came about through living in the UK for some 20 years and seeing the shift in politics, seeing the, to be honest, quite rapid erosion of empathy towards migrants, towards refugees, the lack of sympathy and empathy towards people who are persecuted and seeking refuge because the lives that they're in are basically intolerable. And that people are then demonized when trying to seek refuge. And you had things like the European Union and the effect of its policies towards migrants crossing, empowering the so-called government in Libya to round up, sometimes destroy the boats in which migrants were using to cross the Mediterranean, take back the migrants from the Mediterranean back to their lands, put them into camps, into, again, intolerable situations in which people should not live and should not have to put up with and survive. Playing a part in a country where your representatives, the politicians, were advocating for this, where there wasn't that much pushback as well in popular society, and certainly through the visible media. Although talking to people individually is always different, continually feeling that building. And then in 2014, I'd heard an extraordinary piece of music by a musician called Tumani Diabate. The piece of music was called Lampedusa, and it was about a tragedy that had happened off the island of Lampedusa, where forgive me if I get the numbers wrong, and it was around 250 migrants died, many of which were children. I think there were 70 children on board. Many women, young men. And Tumani Diabate wrote this extraordinary piece of music that was haunting and beautiful. I listened to it for the first time, not knowing what he was reflecting on while making the music. And then learning about that, it obviously made it even more moving. And so I started thinking maybe there's something I can try and take on in this subject in painting. I tried making a painting for the first time at that stage, and it was terrible. And it became like very clear to me that I needed to have much more time with the subject, much more time looking into it. I also felt like I wasn't equipped as a painter enough yet to take on that, and the space that I was in wasn't right yet. I didn't feel I was right yet to approach the subject. So 3 years ago, when I left the UK, and I had a little bit of distance and a bit more time to really research and reflect on the subject, I felt like I could now give myself to the best that I can to making this group of paintings. I don't know if that answered your question. I feel like I went on a meander there.
But I do want to check about what you said, because about the process of the creation of the paintings and the time it took to get these images. You mentioned before in an interview that this series of paintings was born because you read the terrifying history of Eritrean woman trying to cross the Mediterranean. There's also a lot of reference of the imaginary of what happened on the Mediterranean that you have researched. I wanted to know how about what you explained, the process with working with these images that you find, and then just start creating the painting. How is the conceptual and how is the conceptual and the way in which you process these images into reference in order to make these paintings? Because there's a lot of these images in everywhere.
If I'm totally honest, I was quite conflicted in the beginning. I didn't really know what would be the right way to approach research. I wasn't sure whether or not, and here I also have to give a huge amount of credit to the Doris Salcedo's piece Palimpsest. After seeing that and also being deeply moved by the piece, which I know you also did a phenomenal amount of work and research on, I was questioning myself as a painter and the tools that I have to think about and explore the subject. Should I, or can I even conduct the research in a similar way? Can I go out and find individual people and find their stories? And or is there another way that I could approach this? And what I ended up settling on, rightly or wrongly, was to try and find images that were available to all of us. That these are things that we walk around with all the time. So I then started to restrict myself to images that are published, things that if you type in a little Google search about the migrant route or something specific happening, or on Twitter or whatever it's called, about a specific incident or something like that, that all of us could get access to. So it was something that, in a way, we carry with us, and that for me was a way that I could engage with it, and so my process is to draw first, and so I started collecting images and drawing from them, and then slowly seeing and watching interviews on like Vice or other things that you can find on YouTube, and slowly collecting stories, and then trying to figure out what I felt would be a way for me to navigate this and try and express something of of that.
And what you said, I think it's very important that you mentioned that these are public images. I feel like we have access to those images in our devices, in our phones, very close to us. All of these images are of the balance around the world, yet a lot of people, or many, choose to ignore them, actually. But in your paintings, I believe there's an invitation to look closely, like to take some time. It has so many elements. How do you think these images of your paintings like dialogue with those images that we have all around? Like there is like some components in them that help you also be able to understand all of those images. How do you feel they dialogue or they refer to each other?
Wow, you have heavy questions. I don't know if I can articulate that outside of a painting. I don't know if I can make sense of whatever happens through the process of making a painting and why things move you in a particular way, that is what the image ends up being. I don't know. And part of me also doesn't want to try and break that down. Like, I think there is something which goes beyond a particular subject, but for me is about an experience of an art object where I want to be moved by something. And I have to respect that when it happens in an image, and that for me leads me at some point through what I then feel would be a way to create an object that like I said, would allow another to reflect on a situation as well. So again, that's a non-answer, but that's all I'm giving you. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna go then over the most traditional questions. That I think is important because we talked about this yesterday. How did you find Lubugo?
Yeah, so I'd spent a little while questioning all the different aspects of my practice, trying to figure out what I wanted to spend my life as an artist doing. I was quite unsatisfied with where I had got to in art school, and I was finding some problems. I found, for example, painting on a canvas problematic because every time I would make a particular type of gesture, I was in the world of expressionism, neo-expressionism, 1980s paintings, and nothing was leading me back to the kind of socio-political grounding that I was interested in and thinking about, and cultural grounding, which was an East African one. And so for me, I needed to change what I was doing from the very beginning, which starts with the surface. Once you have a canvas, you are within a particular type of painting history. And so I started experimenting with different materials. I tried woven palm leaf mats, but when you paint on a woven palm leaf mat, it looks like paint on a woven palm leaf mat. And so there wasn't the slippage that I was looking for. I still wanted the paintings to function quite conventionally, but so then I eventually did come across the Lubugo bark in a tourist stall, and it was being sold as like a souvenir to remember your ethnic travels and your tribal times in Kenya, and the material itself is from Uganda, so it's not even a Kenyan material. And I found that interesting because then when I went on and started looking into the material, the people who made it, which were the Baganda in Uganda, for them it was their culturally most significant product. Labugo literally translates as a funerary shroud, something for burying the dead in. They used the material for ceremonies, used to use it for clothing. And now it was being sold as a coaster, which is what I saw it as, a placemat, to soak up your beer, yeah, where you want to catch the little bits of food that you missed. There was something of that loss of meaning that seemed to parallel a lot of the pressures on culture and cultures with development, with economic development, with the way that the countries were moving. And also paralleled with tourism, where you end up performing your culture and you end up with a parody of your culture. I found that there was a problem in the material that I wanted to be part of the work without having to make a painting about the problem. I wanted the work to be problematic from the beginning, because I found my position problematic from the beginning. Anyway, I found this material. I did all those things. I painted on it, and then it was only when I treated it like a normal canvas, which took me about 2 years to figure out. As you'll slowly figure out, I'm not a quick thinker. But when I stretched it, primed it, and painted on it, I was like, there's something interesting happening, because this has a totally different cultural orientation, but it's like functioning in a way that on first glance it's invisible. And again, like that for me was interesting. And then it was only when I finally found my way to painting like I'm doing now, well, not like I'm doing now, how I was at that time, that I felt like this was now a way forward. But that process was over about 5 years. Yeah.
On that, I want to ask you, just I was thinking that maybe these canvases as Lubugo, the bark cloth, used as a funerary ritual, and then you painting over it felt a little bit like you were actually given that space of mourning to those faces in your paintings that they never had when they were alive, when they were crossing those migrants. Have you thought on that?
There have been many surprising things which I did not think of at first with the surface, but after having time, that the material is a skin, that it has scars and is repaired, that it's used for burying the dead, that it has, functions in a completely different way and is covered, but still interrupts what's on top of it. Like, those things are important now, and that's only through having time with the material and learning how to paint on it, how it interrupts painting, what it allows me to do, what it gives to painting. And subsequently, the material has changed how I think about the subjects that then go on top of it. And so but there is also a certain level of intention that your question implies, which I don't think I would be 100% honest to say this is now why I did this, but it is part of the work. And yeah.
I was going to ask about your work has been shown all around the world in the global north in very huge institutions, and you have talked about your during your career. You have mentioned you have been inspired by Goya, by Manet, Tian. This series some have seen some influence from Gauguin and Bacon. How do you feel like your work have been evolving, just being in the history of Western art? And how for yourself has been like this development of showing those images?
Yeah, another great difficult question. However huge the institutions were, none of them had the weight of this place. And I have to say that, like, this is different. I think about Western art a lot. I think about certain artists in particular a lot. I think about East African, if we're talking geographically, this is a very crude way of talking about it, but anyway, I think about art from the African continent a lot. I think about art from like different parts of the world, and there are artists that have and continue to affect me, and affect and change how I think and approach painting or whatever it is that I'm making. How I fit within that, I don't think is my place to say. I mean, that's like the legacy questions, which, I mean, that's not for me to judge.
But do you feel are you interested in like question it like?
I mean, in a sense, I questioned it from the very beginning of my practice that I have now. So, one of the things that has for me been great, and I know these are quite internal dialogues, so I don't know how interesting they are beyond, but working on a cloth that gave me a very specific beginning, or so I thought when I used it first, has meant that it's allowed me a level of freedom to pull from other things, and from anything and claim it. In terms of art history, like I don't feel any greater or lesser sense of what's the word when you owe of a debt to an art object that's from let's say a Balinese sculpture than I do to looking at a Titian, than I do to looking at an object made by a contemporary artist in Nairobi, than I do to anything. For me, it's meant that I like there's a way that I feel that all of it is mine, and I know that's problematic. But paintings are mercenaries. They want what they need, and they make you go out and get whatever that is, and then you have to contend with that. And sometimes it's for the better, and sometimes it isn't. So I don't feel. Now I think about those things less, is what I'm trying to say. There was a time where I thought about it a lot, and I found it much more problematic because of the way I was working. But now, with how I work now, I think about them less. I also think it's a very problematic way to box and frame art and the endeavor of an artist. I think geographically it's problematic. I understand that we have different histories. There are different types of intention that mean that one can be kind of trying to take advantage of a situation, whether that's an art object or a person, and then use that to your own benefit. And then there are other ways in which things can be moved by that, which is different. And there is a difference. I don't know how to articulate that, but often I feel you can feel it when you see an art object. You can feel that something is moved by a history, moved by another object, or it's just trying to co-opt something and then use it. The co-opting thing I'm not that interested in. But that you can have different histories that have an equal weight within a narrative, for me, is important. We don't live in isolation, however much we think we do. Even if I take the cloth, for example, when I found it, I thought I was being wholly original. Only subsequent years later to find out that actually, if I knew a little bit or had access to more history of Ugandan artists, there were groups of artists that had used it and developed extraordinary work with it. Not only that, it's a material that's used everywhere. As I find by going in the Gold Museum here, there's a bark cloth here. When I go to Indonesia, they have bark cloth there, and it's used in similar ways. So however specific you try to be, and almost the more specific you are, in a way you speak to more people, the more general something is. And it's very strange how things can work like that.
But I also think or feel like there is a lot of intertextuality in your work and reference. Like Crucible, it makes a reference maybe to Arthur Miller book, and several references in the titles to the Bible or the Kafka trial. How do you think? Why that important for you too?
I like that question because it kind of continues. The reason that I came up with the title Crucible for a previous show of which some of this work was part of was because I was showing in the States. And given the politics of now, and we're all familiar with this, I would assume, and the scapegoating of migrants to turn the majority of people's view away from other types of abuse of power and the mechanisms that are actually causing people's lives to be difficult, for me felt familiar to how Arthur Miller in The Crucible was talking about the main figures that were used as scapegoats for what was happening in the village. There was something very close in that. I was interested in using Christian imagery in particular, given that Jesus was a migrant and that much of the demonization of different cultures around the world, as well as migrants coming in, was dismissive of the beliefs that the people that were giving that had as well. You said and regard in the highest form a migrant who died for other people, and then want to turn around and say, "Get out! You don't belong here." There's a hypocrisy in that, and I was interested in having to show this work. And I didn't make the work thinking about the States. I didn't make the work thinking about that particular political situation, but showing the work in that situation, it has a context. And I didn't want it to be the case where one can walk in and think of something else and it not be relevant to the culture in which it was being shown. So that's kind of another very long-winded answer to say why I was thinking of Arthur Miller's play, The Crucible, for that. And also why, for me, it was important to have four of right on time stations of the cross. There are four of the stations of the cross that are sculpted panels. They're sculpted in wood but cast in bronze.
On that, you speaking about how this exhibition in the States came to be, and I wanted to talk how this exhibition came to be, because we here in Colombia are also read as migrants at the other, and we are part of the Western culture, yet not really part of this global North. Different maybe from Africa, that we have this reference, but we are not part of that. We are not white men. So I wanted to ask you, how do you feel it relates to your work, to this space? I know we have talked about that, but I think it's important how your work is anchored in fragments.
Like I said, this is just such a profound space already that in a way this feels like a group presentation, because the presence of the space is the setting of the work. It's another's work, and I feel like what I've done is participated in something that's already here in a very profound way, and particularly with this subject, and as I've said, there's also the thing that the palimpsest has been a real touchstone work for me throughout making this group of paintings. That it's kind of doubly, not even doubly, it has another layer of meaning to me that that also relates to a lot. There've been a lot of coincidences, and things that are very uncanny about how this show has not only come together, but how it lives now. And like that, there are things that for me I didn't think of. I like but it just makes it feel like it was supposed to be this way, and I can't really describe it in any other terms. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we can take some questions from the public.
Hi, it's great. So yeah, I will talk about factory. Gracias. When you were talking about some way of working you did before that felt problematic and that now it is different, how was it before and how is it now that it is easier?
I still, like I was trying to articulate, I still found making this group of paintings problematic. There is fundamentally a problem with the distance of myself as an artist sitting in a very comfortable way in a studio making paintings reflecting on a subject like this. Like, I didn't want at any point to be trying to speak for somebody else. That's not my place. That's not what I'm trying to do. Nonetheless, it is problematic. Because something's problematic doesn't mean you shouldn't take it on. In fact, I would say that if it isn't problematic, why are you doing it? It's just before, and when I say before, it's 15 plus years ago. I found there was a very big gap between what I was interested in, what I was saying, and what I was making, and that felt dishonest. So it just took me a while to figure out. I stopped painting. Didn't make anything figurative. I tried lots of different types of practices, and it's only again when I found that certain things. It taught me that there are things that I need from my practice, of which one part is being a painter. I've done it my whole life. It's part of me. It's like breathing. It's like eating. I need it. And so, and I know those sound like very unconsidered, selfish decisions to make, but at the end of the day, it's you and your studio, and you have to do things that sustain you throughout, that you are then able to commit to, develop, and change yourself through doing. And for me, the only way that you can do that is if you believe in and are wholly committed to whatever that endeavor is. And so that period was about trying to figure out what the cornerstones would be, that would let me explore things that I was interested in. So, but there are always those questions, though. It's not like, those things go to bed. I just found a way that I felt I could follow.
Okay, yeah, I thank you very much. I really admire your work and I'm happy to see it here in Colombia.
Thank you. That's okay. Thank you.
Hello. To continue a little bit with this kind of questions, I know that your work has been shown in the global north, but I don't know how is the reception on African countries, or for example here, because I think that the next step from your work is actually the other part, because since I know that these are not portraits, but are sceneries, are scenes, and are very punctual, like. So my question is, how does those people who are portrayed in some way in these paintings feel about them? How this conversation starts working? Because of course it's not about judgment, it's about conversation, that this sparks a lot of things. So in this kind of the other ones that you are appealing with your paintings, how they respond to that?
Yeah, I think that's super valid, and again, one of my contradictions and the way that my career has played out is that I haven't shown much in Africa. I haven't shown much in the global south. this is partly why this for me is one of the most important exhibitions that I will probably do in my life. Like it really is. And so there's always a level of exoticism towards the subject, towards the image, towards the paintings, that is something that obviously I find very problematic. I don't feel like I need to articulate that. But I've shown once in South Africa, and I've done talks for school kids in Kenya and things like that. That's the way that I've had conversations. And then obviously when you're lucky enough that somebody comes up to you in an opening who is from the places that I make work about, I get something like that. But I don't think that that's also the best to answer your question, I would need to not be in the room because I think I would need someone to very honestly sit with someone they're with and take the work apart, say whatever they want, and it's different when the artist is there. That's how it is. I'm 100% certain that the way that people speak to me isn't the way that they actually interact with and are affected by the work. So I can give you anecdotes about individuals who've come up to me and said things, who have been part of, who have gone through that route and so on. But I don't feel that that's representative. I'm sorry. It's a bit of a kind of sidestep of an answer. But there is a fundamental contradiction in the way that my career has played out, where for me, my first audience is an East African audience, and in specific, a Kenyan and a Nairobi audience. That was my first audience. When I think in my head, I think about my work functioning initially in that. Now things are changing because things in my life have also changed, but that's always been the case, and I've never shown in Kenya. So, one day I hope that changes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's still going on a conversation, so
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for the question as well.
Hi. I was wondering, your work is extremely figurative, and that tends to be said as an insult these days. But I really love that your work is super figurative. But besides the fact that I love it, how do you feel that this leaning into figuration, why? Sorry, I'm trying to structure the question in my head. How do you feel that leaning into figuration helped this body of work in a context and an art scene that every day tends to lean more and more towards more abstract ways of speaking about violence and displacement and conflict?
Thank you for the question. Again, I'm going to slightly answer this in a different way. When I was dissecting my practice and saying that I tried all sorts of different things, figuration was one of those considerations. And for me, again, like I just said, I was always thinking first of a Kenyan audience. The audience was the people that I grew up in, that I wanted my work to engage with first. And for me, coming from a place where we don't have art museums, there are very few spaces in which someone can interact with contemporary art. And it certainly isn't for the average Kenyan. It's usually for expats, and it's usually in a very rarefied condition in which people came across art. It became important to me that when I made the paintings, there was immediately something that people from Kenya could identify. And so in a very simple, basic, literal way, I thought, well, I'm going to put the people in it. And so then that's why I chose to go down a figurative route. It did also fit in with how I like to work and my way of thinking and so on. It did give me other things, but in a very simple way, those are the parameters from which I decided to make figurative paintings. it's very difficult for me to then to address the second part, which is about the abstraction of language within art towards violence. Not all art is good art. Not all art will move you. Not all art, and we can talk like that, but then you just have to look at what you're sitting on. And this also sits within the world of art. I mean, if you see Doris's practice, find me a point in history where an artist has been able to work within this world and violence and make more poignant work. There isn't one. So how can I then turn around and say, just because whatever is happening at the moment, that within art, there isn't a way of speaking about it? If someone chooses to speak about something else, that's fine. I don't have to do that, and nor do you. So I think it depends what you choose to look at and how you choose to approach things. But I think in this day and age, and in particular courtesy of Doris, I think there is a language that exists, not written, through experiencing it, that is more profound than anything that's been made and sits right there. Yeah.
Thank you. That's brilliantly said.
Hi. I would like to know if you have any advice for young artists who are trying to integrate their cultural roots into a contemporary language, such as you do with your art.
I don't know if I'd take my advice, but anyway, I would like. The only thing, the only thing I can say, and I believe wholeheartedly, is you have to follow your work and what's interesting to you, and you will make things that are problematic to yourself. You'll make things that are problematic to your culture, problematic to other people. But as I said, if you're not making something problematic, what are you doing? If you're not making something that's engaged, for me, that's where I would stop. I would be like, you have to, for me, again, I don't want to tell other people how to live their lives, but one has to feel like there's something on the line. And that is uncomfortable, unfortunately. But it also means that you will have resistance. It may also mean that people get way too excited about things that you're doing as well, and pick up on things. But that's those are the problems of other people. So I think if you follow whatever, and this is a corny ass answer, but if you follow and go down the route of what genuinely interests you and sustains you, I think you'll find answers that I can't tell you and I can't be of use for, but it's there, Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. I have two questions, one more interesting than the other, but I love the way you've described the pace in which you work. I would say that that's a great advice for young artists. And I'm curious to learn what it seems to be one of your epiphanies, the musical work that you mentioned. How long did it take from there to working? Because if I don't know if I understood correctly, it took a lot of time, and that's the pace that I refer to that I really love and wish a lot of artists would take their time. So I'd love to learn what you have to say about that. And the other question is very basic, and it's more in terms of logistics of museums. I'm curious to know why you haven't shown in your own country. Is it lack of I know nothing about Africa, unfortunately, but is it a lack of institutions, or because I tend to empathize
with the situations with museums and our infrastructure in third world countries. So those are my two questions.
Thank you. Thanks for that. First answer, to be honest, it was way too fast the first time I tried working on it. Like I said, I made an horrific painting and a horrific attempt at dealing with the migration because I had the excitement of listening to that piece of music. And I don't know, well, whatever it is, the painting wasn't good and I wasn't ready. However one wants to frame that. It did just so happen, and this isn't through intention, that 3 years ago, my compulsion to deal with it was bigger than the other side, than not. So that like, I don't think that's the way that I would recommend anyone else working. It's not the way that I usually work. It's just how this played out. So again, I don't think there are speeds at which someone makes something that they feel kind of committed to. Sometimes things happen very quickly, and that's just fine. And sometimes it takes 8 or 10 years, and that's also fine. On the second question, when things began for me, I was actually working towards the first exhibition I would have had, which was in a space in Nairobi, and then they just stopped replying to me. So anyway, it was a bittersweet rejection because it then did mean that I had work in my studio. So when I was eventually offered an exhibition, people could say I actually made something, and it was a group of paintings that was made thinking about an exhibition. So that was my first hurdle. And then again, the way things have played out meant that my opportunities were elsewhere. I did do an exhibition on the continent in Cape Town at a museum called the Norval Foundation, which was very special for me to do something on the continent. I have also set up an arts institute called the Nairobi Contemporary Arts Institute, but I don't determine our program. We have a curator that does, and he hasn't invited me, so you should ask him why not. Maybe he will invite me one day, and I will say yes. So yeah, and there have been a couple other attempts that, for one reason or another, haven't worked out. In terms of the art infrastructure in Kenya, again, that's where I know best. We have issues with bringing work in and out. We have issues with keeping work in. We have issues with the type of spaces that we have. There are challenges on every level. That doesn't mean it can't happen, but just means that when the elements are right, it will happen. And for that, I feel quite confident, as long as I don't get run over today, in saying that, I will hopefully do an exhibition at home. And I would love it to be at Nkai, but I need to be invited. So yeah. And if Don ever listens to this, come on, man. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you all. Thank you, Michael.